We are in our second week in this 3-week series called Making Love Last. You remember last week, Pastor Ray taught us from Proverbs, and he was teaching us in Proverbs that the wise person is able to discern, is able to understand the trajectory that their character and their life decisions and their patterns of behavior set them on. Contra the foolish person who is easily deceived, sometimes even by themselves. And what Ray said was that preparation trumps commitment. It's not to say that commitment isn't important in relationships, it absolutely is. But if you commit to be someone that you're not prepared to be, or commit to do something that you haven't been prepared to do, you're setting yourself up for misery and maybe failure. So the upshot of last week was, in Christ, let's commit, to prepare to commit. Next week is the last one in the series, and our brand new associate pastor, Andy, is going to be preaching on sex. So, Andy, I know that might feel like hazing, but it is. The bright side, though, is that John usually plays to our strengths. You got sex and I got narcissism. So make of that what you will. This week we're going to be looking at three myths that I think somehow made their way into the Kool-Aid we're all drinking, and they actually affect our relationships. They hurt our relationships with other people, with God, and with ourselves. And the first one that drama teed us up for so well is the myth of Mr. Right. I'll pray, and then we'll get into it. Father, we thank you for your word, and we know that without it, we're blind. We're groping in the dark. So we ask for your Spirit to be here, to take your word, to use it in our lives, to give us imagination and wisdom for applying your word, to give us creativity. And then as and when you ask us to change, would you give us the humility and the courage and the grace necessary for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Myth number one, the myth of Mr. Right. Some of you maybe do actually have a checklist with all of the attributes of the perfect someone. Hopefully most of us don't, but we nonetheless think in those terms, right? This is a myth that is pretty prevalent in our culture. We see it in our movies, we see it in our TV shows, it underlies our advertising, it underlies Taylor Swift's rise to success. Just kidding, Taylor. But it's the myth basically goes like this. We each have a hole in us that leaves us yearning. And out there somewhere is the perfect someone, the yin for your yang, the person who is absolutely perfect for you. And once you meet that person, you'll know instantly, you'll lock eyes, it'll be love at first sight, and then your feet will never thereafter touch the ground. Your babies will be Gerber babies, and your song will always be playing. That person will complete you. That's more or less the way that myth goes. Christians actually have often taken this myth and we sort of sprinkle some Jesus dust over it and baptize it and make a Jesus version of the myth. And it's pretty similar, but it goes like this. God has tailor-made somebody specifically for you. Somebody who will meet all of your needs. Somebody with whom you will always be happy. Somebody who will complete you. And probably that person is 100,000 miles away, or maybe tantalizingly undiscovered next door. But God is going to lead them through the maze until their life intersects with yours. Your eyes will lock. It'll be love at first sight. You'll be walking on cloud nine for the rest of life, and your babies will be Ameritrade babies. But of course, sometimes God needs help. So we still scour the classifieds or the Pew or the Globe looking for this Mr. Perfect, right? Some of you are quite familiar with the Bible. Ask yourself, in the Bible, where and do we see this myth of Mr. Perfect? Do we see the match made in heaven, as it were? And does it bear up this myth? Think about the most obvious one, right? Adam and Eve. I mean, if ever there were a spouse, tailor-made, custom-made for another one, Adam and Eve, right? Genesis chapter 2 and 3. We meet them, And within half a chapter of meeting them, he's pointing fingers at her, right? They're awkward and uncomfortable in each other's presence, and they're covering up. And one chapter later, their kids are killing each other. I mean, it maybe is a country song, but it's not a song anybody would choose to be their song. And maybe even a better example comes to us in Genesis chapter 24. If you like, you can turn there. It's on page 19 in the Red Pew Bibles, or look it up on your phone. It's a pretty long chapter, so I'm going to summarize it for you, but track along to make sure I'm not making things up. This is the way the story goes. There's a guy named Abraham who has a son named Isaac, and Abraham wants to find the perfect spouse for his son Isaac. In that culture at that time, it was typical for parents to be a little heavy-handed in matchmaking for their kids. Today, we pretend it's not. So he sent his servant miles away to a foreign land to find there the perfect spouse for his son Isaac. And the servant goes, and he travels through the desert, and he comes to a watering hole. And the servant understands that God is a good God who's active, who listens to prayer, who's involved in our lives. And so he determines at this moment that he's going to pray, God, show up and make this happen. I think that's maybe why Christians hang out at water coolers so much at offices. But anyway, the servant says, God, I want you to show me the right woman for my servant's son, Isaac. Let it happen this way. Let her come out and offer to draw water for me. This is verses 12 and 13. Let her offer to draw water for me, and then also, not just for me, but for my camels too. No sooner has he finished praying this prayer than Rebekah wanders down, draws water for him, and offers to draw water for his camels also. And, as if that's not enough, the Hebrew says, she is gorgeous. So then, this gorgeous girl takes home a stranger from the local watering hole. That was typical in the day. We pretend it's not today. He goes home with her to meet the family, and lo and behold, not only is she a verbatim answer to this prayer that he has prayed, not only is she beautiful, which he hadn't prayed for, but also her family is quite well-to-do, which never hurts. So he talks with them and convinces this girl to follow, to come back with him all the miles to meet his father's son Isaac and to marry him. So fast forward to the end of the chapter, you can look there. The servants and Rebekah are on horseback or whatever, coming across the desert through the fields, and it's sunset. And Isaac is out there in the wheat fields, and the fields are glowing golden, and white doves fly up. And I mean, that's not quite in there, but it basically is. And while they're still a long way off, they make eye contact and they recognize each other, they see each other and realize who the other one is. And a verse later at the end of the chapter, they are happily married. I mean, if there were ever a match made in heaven, it sounds like this is it. It's been orchestrated all the way through according to prayer. So how does it work out for them? One chapter later, they've had kids. And they've chosen sides. Mommy favors one, daddy favors the other, and they're now conniving to sabotage each other's plans. 2 chapters, and it's gone from Princess Bride to Jersey Shore. I think the Bible just doesn't give us a whole lot of examples of these matches made in heaven, of the Mr. Right or Mrs. Right. And when it ostensibly does in Genesis 3 or 2 and 3 and then here in 24, there isn't a fairy tale end to the story. I mean, the God, presumably, track with me, the God who is able to make a match like this so miraculously, down to the very detail, presumably is just as capable of giving them the fairy tale end to the story, but he does not. Those matches that we might say are matches made in heaven in the Bible are not preserved from the sort of rough patches that are common to every marriage. I would contend this, that God's goal for marriage is not a fairy tale life. God's goal for marriage is actually gutsier than that. It's grittier than that. It's better than that. It's more real than that. You see, when we buy into this myth of Mr. Perfect or Mrs. Perfect, we end up putting an impossible burden on somebody else. Okay, when I let this myth creep into my marriage and expect Jill to be my everything, to meet my every last need, to make me always happy, to complete me, I'm inviting us both into heartache. I'm going to be disappointed. She's going to intuit my disappointment before I even know about it, and like she always does. And then we're both going to be miserable. What's more, in the midst of making us both miserable by buying into this myth, I have neglected to recognize that God is the only one who can carry this burden of meeting my every need, of being my sustainer, of being my provider, of being the one in whom I find my completion. So when we put this burden on a spouse or a prospective spouse or somebody that we are looking for, not only do we invite them into heartache, not only do we crush them by putting this impossible weight on them, but we avoid giving God the honor of being the only one who can carry that weight. It's called idolatry. And what's more, when I do that, I manage to sidestep the responsibility for myself, for doing my very best to be as close to Mr. Right for Jill as I can. So don't buy into this myth. No one is perfect. No one is going to complete you. No one is going to make you happy all the time. When the Bible talks about marriage, the picture of marriage that the Bible paints is not of two perfect people living a seamlessly harmonious life forever and ever. Rather, the picture that it paints is two imperfect people, two broken people loving each other, learning to become more like Jesus as they serve one another, as they pour themselves out for one another, as they forgive and ask for forgiveness, and learn to love like Jesus. It's no fair to put the expectation of being perfect or other impossible expectations on another person, and especially we can't do that before we have demonstrated our love for them. And that principle has much broader applications than just marriage. That is, after all, the way God deals with us. God never places high expectations on us before first giving himself to us, pouring himself out for us in love, right? That's the way God acts with his people. He initiates, he self-sacrifices, he loves us, and then he invites us into relationship with him. Romans chapter 5, reflecting on this, the crux of history, puts it this way. Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. It says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, totally imperfect, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." So let's recognize this myth of the Mr. Right or Mrs. Right when it crops up into our lives. And let's not buy into it, because when we do, we crush people by the expectations we place on them. We avoid giving God the glory that he is due as the only one who's able to meet our needs. And we skirt the responsibility that we bear for being as close to Mr. Right or Mrs. Right as we can be. That was myth number one. Don't worry, the second two are shorter. Here's the second myth. The myth of imaginary love. Okay? This is the myth that is in love with being in love. It's the myth that spends its time in the chase. It's all about imagining what it would be like to be in love with her or with him. It's all about the emotions and the chase and the flirting and the following. And this, too, is a very potent myth. Think about your favorite TV shows, your favorite movies, and think about any sort of romances that are portrayed in those shows, or books for that matter. How often do you see a couple who are doing a life-on-life relationship in sort of a committed, ongoing marriage throughout the course of the show? Hardly ever, right? Instead, the drama that we are invited into is the imagining what that love would be like as they Imagine it as they flirt, as they chase each other, and at the very end, they get married and the movie's over. Or if it's Shakespeare, they take poison together and then it's over. But it's all about the imagining. Don't get me wrong, imagination is important. Those early days of dating somebody, of pursuing a relationship are wonderful. I remember when I was chasing Jill for the second time. I wasn't the only one. And so there was a spate there of 2 weeks or 7 years or something where she was getting flowers and love notes at her front door from another guy, and bigger flowers and better love notes at her back door from me. And she would call home to her family in Florida to update them. And they, true story, said, "Jill, we don't watch 24 anymore. Your real-time drama is enough." But there's something fun about those early days, and this romantic imagination is a God-given gift. It enables us to see potential with people and to try on in our mind's eye converging life trajectories. And it spurs up emotions, and out of that flows art and Taylor Swift songs and other things. Whole movie industries. I mean, think about the genre of the love triangle, right? And this is really blending myth 1 and myth 2. Think about Hermione Granger and Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. Or think about Katniss. Katniss and Gale and Peeta, right, in Hunger Games. Think about it. Is this not true? I'm watching Hunger Games, which, if you're not familiar with, is based on the premise that there's this reality TV show where human beings hunt to kill other human beings. And I'm watching this, and all I can think about is Katniss going to choose the blue-eyed guy, or is she going to go with tall, dark, and mysterious? I mean, this is the potency of these mixed myths that's all about imagining. And maybe that one resolves, don't spoil it for me, but I am 2 movie tickets into the saga, a full 180 minutes or whatever, and so far it's all about love imagined. In our own lives, you guys know what this is like. You're at the gym, right? And you see this girl, and she's at the gym, so you're like, she must be a marathoner. And maybe she's wearing this hoodie, and you're like, oh, it says Stanford. Maybe just Ford, but definitely she went to Stanford. And so she's got to be killer smart and has a great job. And next thing you know, like 2 days later, you're Facebook stalking her. You've already imagined several years down the road what your love and your lifestyle are going to be like, and you don't even know this girl. That is not real. Real is inviting her back for spaghetti with your most awkward relatives during election season. That's real. Real love is people in relationship, going through awkward patches, going through suffering, through rough patches, going through hilarious moments. But if it's just in your head, it's not real. Let me say this more pointedly. Bluntly, even. If what you love is not real, your love is not real. Biblically speaking, true love is always based in truth. So we got to get out of our heads. We can't just have this imaginary love. We can't be in love with the prospect of being in love and constantly fantasizing about what it would be like to be with her or with him. Love's got to get out of your head and into your life. I think that's somebody's book title, probably. It's got to put skin on. You know, the guy writing the 4th story about Jesus' life, a guy named John, put it this way. He said, the Logos, which at the time was the way of talking about the idea behind all ideas. The rationale, the abstract rationale that holds together reality. John chapter 1, verse 14, he said, the Logos, the Word, became flesh and dwelt among us. A Baltimore pastor translated it this way. He said, the Word put skin on and moved into the neighborhood. Okay, think about it this way. The greatest lover ever, the greatest love ever was not content at a distance, but had to come into life-on-life relationship. God, in Jesus, became a human being so that he could live life on life next to human beings, so that he could suffer alongside and at the hands of human beings, so that he could die for human beings, so that he could be raised for us to offer us new life. And in all of this, he was showing us what real love looks like. It looks like people serving other people. It's real. It has skin on. It's not just in our imagination. So, if your love is mainly in your imagination, be careful. When we imagine love, or when we fall in love with the idea of love, we end up treating people as objects. And we distance ourselves from the real people in our lives. So whether or not you are in a relationship with a special someone right now, get out of your head and into your life. Serve those who are in your life now. Let others into your life. Get involved in other people's lives. Walk with them through hard times. Laugh with them. Practice now loving other people well. The myth of imaginary love. Here's the third myth. The myth of second-class singleness, or that singleness is second class. Have you ever noticed this? There's some point, usually it's around when you're 30, when all of a sudden all the signals change direction. All the messages change, right? You're in your 20s and it's like, single is sexy, be single. Explore, find out who you are, explore all these different career trajectories, be yourself, be free. Don't tie yourself down, and then usually you wake up on your 30th birthday or something, and it's like everything's pointing the other way. You're single? How could you be single? You're not even, what's wrong with you? Maybe it's not when you're 30, maybe it's before that or after that or whatever. I remember in my 20s, I was at the barber. Your laughter hurts me. I was at the barber, and we hadn't really spoken much yet, and she said to me, "How old are you?" And I was like, "I've got game." She's starting a conversation. She's like, I told her, 20-something, and she said, "You have two options. Option number one, you stop going bald. Option number two, you get married very soon." And in that moment, something switched. Something changed. I knew she was not going to get tipped. But that happens, doesn't it? I mean, that's the sort of culture that we live in. And in the church, it's not a whole lot different. I mean, we say it's all right to be single, but actually the way we end up treating it often in churches, it's all right to be single as long as you're a missionary on a steamer to French Guiana, sitting astride a trunk full of Danielle Steele novels and cat food or something like that. But we don't actually treat it like it's honorable and viable and God-given. So let's look at what the Bible has to say about this myth. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 32 through 35. This is on page 1045. "I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife, and his interests are divided. An unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way, in undivided devotion to the Lord." Let me say it clearly. Singleness is not second class. When we at Central treat it like it is, which I hope we don't do, but I'm realistic enough to know that we have blind spots, I apologize. Singleness is not second class. It is honorable. It is viable. When we treat it like second class, we are buying into a myth. I said, I realized this. I realize me saying that it's honorable and Paul saying that it's honorable, which is much more important, is not necessarily going to make a difference in how you feel. Because the reality is that most people who wake up married chose to become married. And it's not equally true that most everyone who wakes up single chose to be single. Doesn't mean it's not honorable. And it doesn't mean it's not good. Because when we were at the beginning, you'll remember we were talking about matches, so-called matches made in heaven. And we said that probably God's goal for your life is not a fairy tale life. He's actually got a much grittier, more realistic, gutsier goal that's truly better. And so whether He's going to lead you through this journey of life holding fast to a partner, not a perfect partner, but a good partner, or whether He's going to lead you through this journey of life holding exclusively to Him, His goal is the same. It's not a fairy tale life. His goal is that you become more dependent upon Him, that you are devoted to Him, and that you learn contentment, patience, hope, how to forgive, how to love. In short, in either of these paths, His goal is that we become more like Jesus. Singleness is not second class. The problem with myths is that they're not true. And the problem with things that are untrue is that they hurt people. When we leave here, we're going back out to the myths. And I'm not asking you to boycott life. That would be silly. Some of these myths are sort of fun as long as we realize they're myths. But I'm asking you this week, notice the myths. Transcend them enough to let them, or to recognize what they are and to not let them shape you. Instead, let the teaching of the Bible shape you. Because when we buy into the myth of Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, we end up putting a crushing burden on somebody else. We miss out on honoring God as the only one who can meet all of our needs, and we skirt responsibility ourselves. Don't buy into the myth of imaginary love. If you think you have fallen in love with the concept of being in love, you're at risk of treating people like objects. Instead, get into your life. Love those who God has put in your life. Serve them. Do life with them. And if you're single, don't buy it. It's not second class. God is good. He wants to make you devoted to Him. He wants to make you loving, content. He wants to shape you, whatever life stage you're in, to be more like Jesus. Let's pray. Father, we thank You for Your word, which, though 2,000 and more years old, is able to cut incisively into our myths in 2015. We pray for Your word to be at work this week. You say Your word is powerful and effective, and it's like a boomerang that doesn't miss its mark. It always does what you throw it out for, and it comes back to you having accomplished that. So I pray this week that Your word would be active in the hands of Your Spirit in our lives, helping us to see these myths, helping us to resist them, and instead to be transformed by Your word, to be bent on becoming more like Jesus. For Your glory and for our good we pray. Amen.